Back in the non-virtual studio. I'm Todd Studer. This is Travis Waldstein, and this is Circle of Trades. Travis, Air Serv Heating and Air Conditioning, and Waldstein Plumbing. And we are sitting at a morning table. We got the sun coming through the trees and going for a little ambiance here. And this isn't AI, by the way. This is actual real sun.
This is the real stuff, and there's a real tree blowing around in the backwards, and it's supposed to be hot and blazes today, which is a good problem. So
well, it's good for somebody in the HVAC business.
Service work is very good for us, so I can't complain about that. So it's all really good actually. So
yeah.
Yeah.
It's summertime in Iowa, and we're going to get the heat.
Mm-hmm.
When I got in my car yesterday when I was headed home, it said 99. I said, that can't be right.
Not quite that warm.
It did drop down to about 94, so it was still warm.
I could tell you I fixed my bagger on my mower last night. I had a belt that broke, and so I got a couple acres, and my wife likes to bag it to save it for gardening. So we did that, and then I had to weed whack her garden since she's been off. So because she has her walkways and they get kind of tall. Yeah, I will tell you, it was hot and it was definitely humid last night. So
I tried that trick when I had a garden in a yard and bagged it and used it as mulch in the garden. All I did was attract crickets.
Well, I don't know. My wife wants to get horse poop for it, too, to help dry horse poop, Ryan. That's all I'm going to say. So not the wet stuff.
It's dry until it rains.
Yeah, it's dry until it rains. I told her, I said, you say one thing about flies after we do this, I don't want to hear about it. So I said, because it will attract flies. Oh, no, it won't. Okay. Well, you do you, Amy.
Well, what do we got today? It looks like you've been a little busy online again.
Well, online. I've got more active on LinkedIn and more as an agitator. I know that shocks everybody.
Oh, I never saw that.
LinkedIn is about fluff and sunshine, but there's some people that got some thoughts. There's one guy that likes to post lots of stuff about franchises, and nothing they say is not true, but it's a lot of stuff that the franchisor doesn't like to have you hear about, so it kind of whatever.
Are you talking about franchises in general or yours in particular?
No, in general. But in general. It's not just my franchise. But, it kind of talks about that, and there's some points. And, yeah, I've got some people at my corporate that goes, why did you repost that? I said, well, it's true. Well, we don't like it. Well, that's even all the more reason to post it. If you want me, I said, you want to pay me enough money or cut me back enough royalties, so I don't want to post. You don't want me to post stuff. Fine, but until that happens, I said, forget it. So,
well, I have a feeling that if you were in the bottom third of producers inside of your franchise, conversations might go a little different, but you're not. No. You're right up at the top, so they kind of have to listen.
Well, they don't have to listen. They just know that I'm persistent. So, or my wife say try to get kicked out at all. That does is get us into more stuff. So, but that's a story for another day. So, I'm not the author of this, and this has nothing to do with my franchise today. So, just out here. But it's a guy by the name of John Kelly. He owns the author of the HVAC Contractor's Bible. Building a solid debt-free business. So here's what he has said. This is talking about people in the trades. 30 years ago, the trades were a fallback. Grades weren't there. Not going to college, go be a plumber. Mm-hmm. That was the pitch, last resort. Listen, I went to Spencer High School. Iowa's last chance college was a thing. So also known as Iowa Lake. So now look at where we are 30-some years later. You'd think the trades would be the most sought-after work in the country. The money's there, the demand's there. No one is outsourcing a furnace change out to another continent. No AI is crawling through a 130-degree attic in August to hang ductwork, and that is the truth.
Yep.
Yeah, AI, and still fewer people come in every year. Here's the part that no one says out loud. The infrastructure of the United States runs on licensed electricians, plumbers, HVAC contractors. That's not an option. It's code. Everybody has to, and that's why you have your licenses. Our industry is heavily regulated, not as much as maybe the medical field, but more than a lot of fields are. Them licenses take years to earn. You just don't go out and open up a business today and you have a license. That's not how that works. So the people that are holding the licenses are aging out, and that's very true. The bench behind them is thin. So, if we don't fix the on-ramp, the cost, the weight, the hoops it takes to get licensed, this stops being a labor shortage. It starts becoming an infrastructure failure. And there's a lot of truth to that. And so when we do that, we talk about. Let's talk about the first time we got hot 2 weeks ago, and we started losing power here locally.
Yep.
We'll talk about that. So don't let me forget that. So the two things that happened: make the path to a license faster and cheaper without lowering the standard, which I have my thoughts on that. And then dangled the carrot everybody responds to money. Show a 19-year-old what a licensed technician is making at 26 and watch how fast the applications come in. We're going to have to do something, and we're going to have to do it soon. And who's actually working on this? So, so my part is, I think as an industry, so my first comments was, I think we do a great job of teaching. There's lots of schools, there's lots of classes about how to be a technician. But you know what they don't talk to you about? They don't talk to you about the book side, the financial side, the insurance side, the licensing, what's involved with it, all the other stuff that has to be a business owner. Now, we touch on that in my shop, probably more than a lot of shops do, about what's involved. Marketing, that's a very real one, so, just get the phone ring. But, when you talk to a 19 to 25-year-old, and they see what I have to deal with every day, and they go, ooh, that sucks. Well, yeah, it sucks, but that's part of what you do to pay the bills. But, so they miss out. So we talked about that argument. And one guy came back to me and said, actually, the guy who wrote this, and he said, look, he says, it's like eating an apple. You eat it one piece at a time. So I'm like, well, that's, and that's a great way to look. I didn't think about it that way. Kind of like we were talking about earlier, before we started the podcast, you were showing me something. You can't just do it all at once. You got to take a piece of pie. Am I correct or am I not correct?
That's 100% correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of like the thought. I did kind of really like the thought process on that, with that, and then part of that is kind of the infrastructure. In here, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I think the first really hot day where it hit 100 degrees. I think Carter Lake had power problems, Council Bluffs had power problems, OPPD had power problems, Glenwood, I know, had power outages, And so we talk about infrastructure. They've been telling us for years the infrastructure is a problem. They talk about data centers and, the power that they consume. I was talking to somebody who is involved with, I want to say it's a solar farm that they talk to down in northern Mills County. I talked to somebody about that the other day, that that's something to be involved. Who they going to sell that power to? Well, you're right across the street from or up the road from Google, and you got Bungie and you got the other stuff there. So, but we talk about infrastructure. We've been told for 50 years our infrastructure for electrical is bad. We've been told for plumbing, we're going back now and changing lead water services out that were put in before 1960 because, lead does bad things to you, especially the lead flavored paint I ate growing up. That was some tasty stuff, let me tell you. But, so they talk about the infrastructure. Well, somebody's got to be willing to do that. I think the schools, when they talk about middle schools and high school stuff, I think they do a better job now of talking about the trades than they probably did 5 or 10 years ago. Because I'm seeing more young people now that are coming out of high school, or a couple years out of high school, that are looking at doing this versus what I saw 10 years ago. So it is getting discussed. But I think what is being discussed, I think at the high school when they're selling this, and this guy talked about it, well, what's that 19-year-old going to be making when they're 26? The key part is they got to get to the trade to be 26 and spend the time in to make that money. Mm-hmm. You're not going to make it when you're a first-year apprentice at 19 years old. And so, we have to put in what I call a realistic expectation, as far as that goes. But I thought, sometimes we get off on tangents like Hawkeye football and feral cats and, all the stuff. I love to talk about Council Bluffs and just, rib everybody. But, sorry we'd stay with this subject for real today. It's like, what does that look like? And listen, I'm not just talking plumbers, electricians, and HVACs. Look at framers, look at roofers, look at drywallers. We're doing work at Whispering Oaks right now on Greenview Road. And I hate to say it, you go look at the contractors that are out there, and I'm not politically correct. As a GC told me once, and this is going to sound terrible, and I'm not racist when I said that I got to be the whitest heating and air conditioning company in the United States because he's on his job site. No other white guy except for a couple plumbers and HVAC guys. The rest of them are from Mexico or Guatemala or wherever the hell.
Yeah, but from. I do think though that actually indicates something else besides somebody's talking about stereotypes. It's not that.
No.
What it is that is an indication that here in this country, we are still not doing a good job of letting these young people know that not only is this an option, it's a good option.
It's a good option.
And people coming here from other countries recognize that pretty quick.
Absolutely.
And that's why it is overloaded, I think, with folks. And this needs to be, as you talked about it, this is not the safety net to catch everybody that fell through that's not doing other stuff.
No.
This not only is a viable option, sometimes it's a better option. If you want to go to college and do a 4-year degree, get your psychology degree, and then go out, try to get a job, can't find a job, so you end up in sales.
Or a band degree.
And so you can end up, you're making $65,000, $70,000, and you're making an okay living being able to do this kind of thing. But at the same time, you have a big loan to pay back.
Yeah.
Or you go this direction, not only is it paid for as you're training, but you're making money along the way.
Absolutely.
So I know I'm preaching to the choir here. This is more for the folks that are watching. But we've moved past that. I was watching, Mike Rowe was on one of the talk shows just recently.
Yeah.
And he said something that I'd heard before but hadn't thought about, was that for every 5 tradesmen that are aging out of the industry, only 2 are coming back in.
Okay.
He said 2. So that's
better than what I thought it was.
Yeah, it's still going back the other direction. He said currently in what is classified as the blue-collar world, there is 400,000 jobs today that are unfilled.
100%. And they can't get filled, and so what you're doing is you're having to run on, you're having to run less than maybe you're capable of doing, because
you don't have the staff to be able to do the work. You could be handling more work.
Yeah.
But you can't find the people to plug in because there's not enough people coming into the industry.
Yeah, 100%. And I absolutely agree with that. And but everybody starts out from somewhere. I had a discussion with a kid up in Northwest Iowa on Sunday, and he'd been in the trade for about 2 months, and he had a bad experience with a contractor, and his uncle and me went to high school together. His uncle called me on the back way to Arizona, and I talked to this kid, and we talked about his experience. Well, the company I had worked for, it was an HVAC and plumbing contractor that and I actually think pretty highly of. But they said they sent him out there day one to glue, and what they do is to glue PVC together. Well, he's never glued PVC together. He didn't know how to do primer. He's never done it before. No one's taught him. And he said these guys got mad at him because he did it wrong. He says, I've never done this. Show me. And I think the thought process is that this kid should already know what he's doing. And here's the reality of it, In high school, I got certain guys. I got a guy named Shane who works for me. He worked with cars with his dad growing up, very mechanically minded. He does HVAC for him, but he's a motorhead. He races out West Fair. Someone like him and someone like my son Hayden, who worked on stuff, and their dad was involved. And they did mechanics, they fixed stuff, whatever. Them kids are still out there, and they're just fine because you show them something once, I've done it, or maybe they've done it before with some of their stuff to do. But 90% of the kids, if we're being transparent about it, have not done any of that. Their dad couldn't fix anything. Now, if you want to play Xbox or Fortnite or Call of Duty or whatever, oh yeah, Dad's great at Call of Duty. Oh, but can he fix the kitchen sink? no, actually, mom's a better mechanic than what dad is. And that happens a lot more these days than it ever used to. But, well, we don't want to ask mom, and it's like, well, wait a minute here. If mom's the one that knows how to fix it, maybe you need to spend some time and listen to her. My point being is the vast majority of the kids have no clue until they see it. So when you bring an apprentice in, at first I thought with the first year apprenticeship, and now that I've taught it for almost a year, some of the stuff is like, holy cow, this is super elementary. But then the flip side of it, you have to remember where they're coming from. If they've never seen PVC, if they've never worked with a screwdriver, they've never worked with a hammer, their parents didn't show them because either they didn't need to, or they didn't, or did have the ability, or maybe they rented the place. So if something was broke, they called the landlord, So it's kind of it's amazing where we have to start at. But if you start at the very basics and fundamentals, then, and you get them right, then you can build a great employee, but it's going to take time. But if you're coming in that first day apprentice, if you think you're going to make $80,000 a year in year one, you'd be sadly mistaken. But to your point, and I've talked with, many financial advisors, with people who went to school, not against going to school, but depending what you go to school for, it takes a long time to make up for that money that you spent going to college had you been working and not accumulated debt. And I think that's the thing you really have to take a look at and go, oh, wow, I did not realize how much that affects
Right.
what we're doing. And I think that's a very interesting, perspective, when we look at that. So, but that's part of the conversation that I've had with, young employees. But like I said, this whole article, it's like, where do you start? How are you, what's the conversations like, for a first year apprentice versus a fifth year? And, where do you start talking about business? I think if I start with a guy that's been in the trade for 6 weeks and I talk business, he's going to look at me like a deer in the headlights, just like you're looking at me like that, going, "No, that sucks," But I think if you get 6 months, a couple years into it, they've been into it, says, okay, do you want to talk about the business side of stuff? Or send to me and say, okay, what do you want to know? What is it that you've seen or you've seen us do that we haven't talked about? And so, so I think that's a conversation you need to have, because there's a whole other side to this. As I said, there's lots of guys and gals, that can fix stuff, repair stuff, install stuff. But, there's a whole other side to the business, too. If they eventually be business, because that's going to be the next thing that's going to happen. You're going to have employees, the people are dying out, or private equity's bottom up, and there's really nobody that knows how the hell to run a business.
Well, and that's, I think, a place where we lack still in the school system. I know that there's some business classes, but typically they're talking in generic terms.
Yes.
And it's a different deal when you dive into what you are specifically doing at AirServe and with Waldstein Plumbing about those specific business practices, as opposed to just a generalized business idea, that's about all you're going to get in a classroom. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, and I'm going to leave her name out of it, but I got a gal that worked for me about 10 years ago. She still lives here in Council Bluffs. I don't see her as much as I used to, but she came to work for me. She went to college at St. Mary's. And she'd worked for a charity doing accounting. Well, I don't know anything about charity accounting, I'm going to say, but there's no cost of goods, and it's all, okay, here's what we got paid, here's the expenses that come out. Pretty easy to do a P&L. Mm-hmm. The first month I'm in, there's all these receipts, there's invoices from my supplier, and she's like, what the heck is this? It's called cost of goods. It's fuel, it's everything that we spent. Well, I've never had to learn that. So she's like, oh my God, I spent all this time in accounting. She had no clue. And she did it, and she got really good. But I was in a point in position, I couldn't pay her a lot more money, and so she ended up moving on to another contractor in Omaha, which was good for her. And now she's working at Key West. Last time I knew, she's a vice president running a group of accountants there. And we talked one day. She goes, Travis, I want to be doing this, making the money that I'm making a day. had I not came to work for you. You know, and so she goes, yeah, I wouldn't be anywhere close. I would have never seen any of this stuff. It was a life-changing deal for her. Now, she's probably 10 years younger than I'm 53, so she's probably late 30s or early 40s, so she's quite a bit younger. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to where, you know, you take a look at what happens today might affect you 5 or 10 years down the road, not just directly, but where it ends up where it ends up taking you. You know, I come down to this for business. I didn't go into business. Well, I went into business because I couldn't work for anybody else. If come right down to it, I'm kind of an ass. I don't. It's hard to believe, everybody, but the reality was I wasn't gonna be happy to work for anybody else, and you know, because I want things a certain way. Let's buy it into a shop, and I just said I want to start my own chaos. And believe me, there's chaos. Everybody has their own deficiencies. Everybody has their own, you know, functions. Everybody's got their own problems. You know what I'm saying? And, you know, but at the same time, you know, you have to work in them processes. You have to refine them processes. But like I said, I started this whole thing because I want to be able, I care for 100 hours a week. I want to be able to serve customers, do my craft, but then also, you know, if I want to go watch my kids play football Wednesday at 4 o'clock at Titan Hill or, you know, at the Council Sports Complex, I could do that. That's why I got into this. And, you know, so, you know, it allows a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility. It can give you a lot of headaches and lose a lot of sleep too, or have your hair turn gray. Where I'd rather be bald, but my wife will let me be bald, but we won't talk about that. But my point being is it's amazing the kind of the avenues it can open for you. But like I said, the interesting is like we circled 30 years ago. Okay, well, you're not worth a damn anything else. You're not amount to anything. Go be a plumber. Now it's like, oh, yeah, you need to go be a plumber because they could make, you know, X number of dollars if you know what I'm saying. So.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on with that. I don't understand why your franchise had a problem with any of it. That makes no sense to me. No. I didn't hear anything in there that would be controversial.
That was not the controversial.
Okay,
yeah,
that's something else. Okay,
no, it is totally something else. But yeah, I let's put it this way. I put something out there to, you know. So back to that, we'll finish the story. I'll finish that story. So it was something totally related, and they were talking about a bad franchise experience. And that guy says, yeah, amen to that. I said, I've been a, you know, air serve for 17 years, blah, 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 blah. And I said, I had to deal with this. And I said, amen, there's such thing as good franchises and bad franchises. I got a call for the president of Neighborly, the president of repair services for brand, the president for air service. I got a call from 6 people. Says, do you have all the problems? I said, yeah, I got a lot of problems. I said, I'm in a lawsuit with you guys, which is no secret. You know. But I said, it's gotten better. I said, it's gotten a lot better. But I said, yeah, 100%. I said, this is a true statement. And if you don't like what I said, do better. And you know what I got? Crickets.
Yeah, I could see that.
100%. Do better. So
well, on the upside, I'm pretty sure we got subscribers out of them. They want to know what you're saying. Because if you posted that and then you're getting calls right away, yeah, they're paying attention.
Oh, yeah, people do. They're like going, ooh, wow, ooh. I said, well, you know, I got no filter, which is maybe good or bad. So, but anyway, so that's my talk for it. That's my thought for it.
That's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
No, that's actually pretty good.
Yeah, I didn't pull it out of my butt, but it's like, yeah. But I've been spending time on LinkedIn. I don't really love LinkedIn, but it's sometimes, I don't know, it's a little bit foo-foo for me. I'm not a foo-foo. I'm a meat and potatoes guy. I don't need... I texted the president of my neighbor the other day. There's one guy that's always on there, and he's always getting awards or he's always doing this. I said, does this guy actually work? I said, all I see is getting awards and going to Congress stuff. He goes, and I go, because I said, I kind of think he's a putz just from the awards. I didn't hold back, right? Uh-huh. And so he texts me back, says, Travis. He says, this guy manages a group that has to bring in this many people in a year to the franchise. Here's what he does. He's probably one of my best friends. He's one of the hardest people I work. And no, he's not a putz. But the marketing team, the way they put it together, I could see you calling him a putz. But that's just you, Travis. Okay, fair enough. I'll be nice to the guy then.
There you go. Well, sir, grateful for your time as always, and this was a good one. I think some good information there. And moral of the story: young people, take a look. Take a look at it.
We'll ask questions.
See, exactly. All right. Wraps up today's show. Thank you so much for being a part of it. He's Travis. I'm Todd, and we'll see you next time.